All right, so I'm going to review the different types of passive solar gain in the last couple of slides. We'll look at direct gain, isolated gain, and indirect gain, also known as sun space. For a direct solar gain, which is the most common passive solar system, we put the majority of our glazing to the south. We have mass, thermal mass, in the illustration we see here. Because we have a clerestory, we're also taking advantage of the wall in the back as well as the floor. Here's some images of some homes that have been designed for direct solar gain. Again, the one to the right, there's two things happening there. One is that a lot of the windows are oriented to the south, but also they're taking advantage of the roof for solar panels. And then there's actually on either side of the openings, there are panels that have been folded back that can be closed when needed to provide even more shading. The calculations for direct solar gain for passive is that we want 20% of the floor area to equal the square feet of all glazing. Again, if you remember at the beginning, if we keep our glazing to these sort of numbers, 20% of all of it, we save 10 to 20% on our energy. If you have the glazing all around, it's going to be less effective. Ideally, for a passive design, you have 12 to 15% of that area as south glazing, and that would leave about 5%, 8 to 5% for use on the other walls. There's also a type called sun-tempered design where the glazing is even less, and it is only 8 to 10% of the floor area. Now, because we live in the Pacific Northwest and access to daylight is important to us for psychological reasons, if none other, we tend to want to have more windows and not less, which is why you don't see sun-tempered designs in the Pacific Northwest, but you will see passive. The indirect solar gain, and again, the reason this is listed as not recommended is it's not recommended in our climate. In a hot desert climate where the sunlight is very bright and glary, indirect solar gain can be an awesome way of dealing with trying to minimize that direct solar gain into your living space during the day, and then having that heat at night, especially because in a desert climate, we have very large differences between the temperature during the day and the temperature at night. And so having that warmth radiating back into our space can be ever so important. Now, this thermal mass that we see to the left is called a tram wall. I know that in the reading there was a pronunciation guide. That tram wall is can be water, it can be concrete. Water, if you remember, has a very high temperature heat capacity, so it can absorb a lot of heat and then it radiates it back. Typically, if a tram wall is done with water, it's kept in black tubes or barrels. It's not especially attractive, which is why we tend not to see water tram walls as often as we do trom walls made out of concrete or stone. The distribution is a convection conduction here. We also have convection and conduction and radiant in the previous version. Another look at indirect solar gain. These are some images from, again, some hot climates, deserty climates, where minimizing the amount of glary light coming in can actually be a positive. And some interesting ways of looking at how to create that trom wall. In the lower right, we see a very creative solution where it's actually rocks that are held in a metal netting, and there are little bits of daylight that are coming through, making it a very sculptural option, whereas in the image to the left, we see a hospitality type environment where they're taking advantage of the walls, the trom walls, to as a way of putting art in. They're also painted a darker color, which helps with that heat absorption, but also creates a bit of a rhythm in the space. And then the one that's in the upper right-hand corner, I like because it's really bringing that indoor-outdoor connection, in that the wall is continuing from the inside to the outside, and then there's little view windows that are set up, as well as that strip that's along the edge. So we're not keeping you from looking to the exterior, and this is a much greener environment that we see here, as opposed to a more deserty environment. The last type that we're going to talk about is the isolated solar gain, which is also called a sun space. And sun spaces are meant to be inhabited, but they often can be used as a greenhouse kind of concept. They can get quite warm in the summer months, and it's something to keep in mind, because the heat is meant to generate in that sun space, and then through conduction and convection move throughout the rest of the space.